Hi David, so welcome and thank you for joining us today to talk about the Happiness Lab. To begin with, could you just give us a brief overview of the Happiness Lab?
Yeah, thank you. Great to see you. Thank you for inviting me along. We describe ourselves at Happiness Lab as the employee listening and well-being platform. And, and I think it's really about giving employees a voice and encouraging organizations to listen differently to people. Allowing them to see much more, I guess, than you get from traditional surveys alone. That's really what we do. We do it, as you'll all know, through this daily check-in routine. So, how do you feel? And then a free-form narrative, and that gives us a really rich picture of life inside your organization, how people feel, how they're doing, and of course, an opportunity for people to share their experiences and talk about those things. So that's what Happiness Lab's all about.
Brilliant, thank you. And how do you think the Happiness Lab supports SJP culture?
And that's a great question. I mean, culture is really what it's all about. It's where we started. It's about helping organizations to become healthier, happier, more productive workplaces, right? That's what it's all about. And it's about paradox. It's about the sort of finding this balance between human and organizational needs. And Happiness Lab plays a part in that by allowing people to, share their story, because there's always a gap, right? There was a gap. We were a management consulting firm, and this gap that we encountered, there's three levels as I described it, right? So there's the culture that an organization wants to have, it's like its aspiration. And then there's the one that, if we're feeling really positive, we might imagine that we've got. Quite a lot of leaders sit there. Right? So this is how I believe our workplace is. And then there's the culture that's described by the people working in the organization on a day-to-day basis. And they are tiered, as you'd imagine. So the best is our aspiration and the favorable view that we have. This is how we imagine it to be, the one we're trying to create, if you like, in a practical sense, and then how it really is. And that's what we face, in Happiness Lab helps us to bridge that gap. It's very hard to close any gap if you can't see it. So we're about creating transparency around that, trying to encourage organizations to embrace transparency and sharing information, making it clear to people where we are, what we're experiencing, and everything on Happiness Lab is an opportunity, isn't it? So the things that people share, the way they share them, the way they interact with one another, they're all marks of culture. What we're prepared to talk about, how we respond when other people say things that we don't agree with. Again, they're great opportunities to learn and develop culture and constantly just improve what we do as an organization to get better outcomes.
Brilliant, thank you. And our theme today is all about our community. So how do you think the Happiness Lab can help with that sense of community?
Yeah, I think, again, it's a really important part of what we're trying to do. And it was sort of, I gotta say, it was a hopeful part of what we were doing. So this idea that when you share and you create, the happiness wall, when we first launched it, and still is in some places, actually quite a daunting thing for organizations, a free-form narrative about workplace. But then, and the first one we launched, and SJP were the first organization to try this in 2017 with Jim Cleaver's team, was static. So there was no interaction. It was an opportunity to share something, and that was it, a rating and a comment. And then there was a sort of a request for a like button. And then I don't like liking things when somebody's having a tough time, so coming up with some different reactions. And then we went whole hog and allowed that interaction. And what's really interesting is that the importance and the power of support shown to one another by people. So I'm having a tough time, however I describe that. And then you watch somebody else come and say, "Hi, I'm really sorry to hear that. It's David, do you want a cup of coffee?" And we see that quite, and of course that back in the days when people were sitting around the corner from each other. But I think that sense of community, that belonging to something, being part of something bigger than ourselves, of course, and sharing characteristics, is really fundamental to all organizations, and particularly strong at St. James's Place. And I think that the point for me is then, how the role that Happiness Lab can play in that anonymous, safe place to share stuff, and then the supporting role, even having respectful debates with one another about subjects that are hard to discuss. That's enabled through the sort of safety that we can provide through anonymity.
Absolutely, brilliant, thank you. The daily frequency is something that many people wonder about. What are your thoughts on how often we should be using the Happiness Lab?
Yeah. I don't think there's a right answer to this. There's my version of the right answer, right? And then I don't know. So daily, we do daily because we want to get that sense of in the moment, real time thing that you don't get if you ask somebody once a fortnight, even once a week, right? How do you feel? And great to do that check-in for that moment, but what we don't get is that through time picture. So the reason we're doing daily is we want to build a picture of real life inside organizations and the nuance of how that moves about. Now, there are some aspects of what we do that lend themselves to building emotional intelligence and awareness. So that sense of, if I check in with myself and I start to understand what's going on, how I respond to different things, it's akin to, I guess, tracking calories and stepping on the scales, so sort of, I'm aware of the inputs and the outputs and therefore can track change. So that's powerful. And of course, I'm also very mindful of the fact that our well-being algorithms, so the stuff that's tracking how you're feeling and making sure that we're picking up signs of decline of distress, they're more accurate when people check in frequently. That said, there is nothing that stops people checking in once in a while. We know that people tend to come back and share stuff when they've got something to talk about. What I would encourage anybody watching this to think about is, how do we get the best reflection of life in our organization? So sharing stuff that is benign sometimes. It's okay right now. I'm doing all right. Just letting your colleagues know they're okay, sharing context, checking in with them that they're okay. That's all helpful stuff, comes back to the community piece. But, I think more frequent, better outcomes for organization, better outcomes for self. But just checking in every now and again is also okay. What we just don't want, I think, is only using it as a space to share the really crappy bits of our working life, because that distorts culture.
Okay, that's really interesting. Thank you.
Makes sense?
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. So moving on. So we often get asked how anonymous the Happiness Lab is. Can you share with us how that works?
Yeah. I'm fastidious, if you like, probably the wrong word, really precious about anonymity. Psychological safety is a really critical part of any team. I mean, Google go as far as saying this is the one characteristic that sets great teams from good teams and bad teams, so that psychological safety. Now, when you read about psychological safety, we're all talking about this sort of ability to speak up. What stopped, if only that flight attendant had told the pilot that the plane was going to crash if we didn't do this, and they didn't feel safe, but most of us don't reside in worlds where life or death matters around it. But what we do find, of course, is that it's very hard to challenge status quo. It's very hard to put our hands up and say we're not doing okay, because there are consequences. And so anonymity is fundamental to getting a sense of anything that is out of the ordinary, if you like. And so for people to be able to share, and there is a point in psychological safety where you get to think, actually, let's have a grown-up conversation, and I can put my name to it and you put your name to it. We're all quite a long way away from that, actually, in most companies. And if we insist upon that, and lots of companies ask us for it, can we just have it not anonymous? Well, you could, but you'll only hear from the people that you always hear from anyway, right? Those courageous souls who are prepared to stand up and say when they don't agree with things. So I think that's really, that's about why we do it. We protect it really seriously. So things like minimum population sizes inside data reporting, so you can't do anything that says, okay, well, there's 2 people over there, let's see what they're saying. It won't do that. It's 5 people minimum, and even down to delaying reporting stuff. So if you were the first person in your team to check in and share something on the wall in the morning, well, that won't appear until there are enough people for you to be, I guess, hidden in the crowd. So things like that matter. No cross demographic. So you can't do, I want to compare this demographic, because you end up then with too small a group of people. And so things like that so that we don't reveal people inadvertently. Private messaging, the feature that we introduced that stopped us having to email people when we were concerned about them, but meant that we could write to somebody in the platform and you could correspond with me without me ever knowing who you were. of course, I know you use that, Charlotte. So I know you use that feature that you can write to somebody, they'll know that it's you, and you won't know who they are unless they choose to tell you. So those sorts of things become really important aspects of protecting anonymity. Now, we have got this idea, by the way, long term, where there's a point at which you say to companies, well, look, actually, maybe you're ready to turn off anonymity. And there's like a master switch. You say, now you can choose to deploy your name or not, but,
Okay.
but I don't think we're there yet. Right?
Okay.
I really don't. I think it's really important for us to be able to continue this idea of, there's nothing stopping anybody writing their name in their comment, is there, to say, hi, it's David. But in the main part, what we really want, I think, is for people to use their voice respectfully and use it in a way that's going to encourage others to interact with them.
Brilliant. Okay, that's really good to know. Thank you. So are you able to tell us a little bit about how the flag system works on the happiness wall?
Yeah, flagging is, again, one of those sort of evolutionary bits. Just how do we take action? How can we do more with the commentary in particular? And so it started out as a government body, actually, that used to have they used to have a whole team of people that would moderate survey responses, because people would write their managers' names and swear about people and all that sort of stuff. And so they have a bunch of people whose job it was to remove these things. So can we have a moderation button? And that's what the flag started as. And it then became clear to us that there's a bigger opportunity. So the second step was, so moderation, of course, being the sort of, this is inappropriate and shouldn't be on here, hardly ever gets used. And even in that organization, by the way, that had a whole team of people, we didn't use it. So we built it and put it on the platform, and nobody needed to moderate anything. So moderation, well-being, so was the second one. So I see something that concerns me, and again, I know you have access to this feature. So somebody, you flag, I'm worried about this person, or this person looks like they're having a tough time, goes into the well-being center, and somebody's presented with an anonymous package of data. It just gives them an ability to triage, to make a sort of risk assessment of whether somebody is looking okay or not, based upon comments, and then reach out and contact them if they need to, and if not, just to let it go. So that's the other piece. And the last one is actions, which has taken a number of guises in the last couple of years as we've been evolving and learning about this particular feature. And there's a new action log being rolled out at the end of October, actually, which is essentially going to be an innovation funnel. So a way of saying, okay, well, here are some comments that are, so there's lessons that I was referring to earlier on. What can we learn from? What can we do something about? So behavior that we might think, okay, well, maybe we could have a conversation with people about the way we talk to one another. Maybe we could think about examples of things that are not working as an organization, and we can improve some processes. So anyway, so flagging actions, and then being able to explore those more fully, collate and gather together different things that are of a similar nature, and then turn that into a project or project or experiment, and then track the impact of that on people by creating an experiment in Happiness Lab and tracking the impact on people. So there's sort of full cycle of connecting the daily check-in data to actions that result and how they fulfill one another. So that's what the flags are about. And I think, again, just to audience, that's available to everybody. And I think what we're trying to do here is distribute responsibility for improvements in culture. So if you see something on the wall that you think, actually, do you know what, that's a great idea, or that's something we should stop, or that's something we should do more of, then flag it and explain what it is that you think could be done with it. And then, what we're hoping to do with Ian Butcher and the other champions is create a sort of rolling kind of, I guess, whether they're sort of charities, but open sessions where we can get people to come in and talk about and explore with us the ideas that we're seeing from the wall, saying, well, this is something I've got some energy towards helping to fix. And it stops us from having that top-down change done to us, which none of us particularly like, and that just will be part of doing smaller ongoing improvements.
Brilliant, thank you. And that leads us nicely into our last question. So how do you think the Happiness Lab helps SJP to look after the well-being and mental health of our people?
Yeah, brilliant question. I said right at the beginning that we describe ourselves as the sort of employee listening and well-being platform. And the well-being piece, I mean, let's be honest, although we are called Happiness Lab and we were thinking about happiness is a gauge, right? It's not the objective. It's a way of saying, when we get everything else right, people perform better. Stress, burnout, is negatively correlated with happiness. I.e., so when we feel better, we have more good days, we typically not disappearing with stress. And we learned that, and we've learned that through our data over the years, so that we realized in 2019 that we could see decline, negative spirals, as they're often referred to, happening. And so we set about at that point trying to work out how can we get ahead of it, right? So how can we use the data that we've got rather than look back on it and say, oh, look, that person had a really terrible time. Can we spot it sooner? And so not only, as we've touched on already, can we use the flag, so everybody keeping an eye out for one another, saying, actually, somebody in this group is not having a great time, can we reach out to them? But also, you know, we have these algorithms now that are just monitoring. So once you rate it a few times, you're not spying on you or anything like that. The system is just pricking up its ears every now and again. So if you normally rate between 60 and 80 most days, and then all of a sudden you chuck in a 30, the system is going to say, okay, well, that's not like that person. And then a couple more like that, and it will just create a little case in the Wellbeing Center that somebody else could go and look at and say, okay, well, is this just a blip? Is there something going on? And it's about that early intervention. Most of us as managers or leaders only see these things when it's too late to do anything. And as we said before, if I'm only going to put my hands up when it's really desperate, right, we've missed the opportunity to really help and even just to feel connected and belonging again. So we've got those things happening in the system. And I think, you know, at a really brass tacks level as well, you know, things like the dashboards are about saying, look, you know, we're putting data now in front of managers saying your team are reporting mostly good days, or, you know, mostly okay days, and looking at that good day ratio. If you haven't seen it, it's right on the front page, top left. You know, how many good days are reported compared to bad days? It's a great way of understanding general sentiment being expressed by your people, how many good days they're having relative to bad, because, as I said before, you know, when people are reporting good days and high frequency good days, they're not likely to suffer from burnout. So we're all going to be up and down on this continuum, and occasionally having the bad days. What we don't want is to slip into that as a routine, and we don't want lots and lots of them, and therefore to trigger a negative spiral in ourselves because of all the negative consequences for us and the collective as a result.
Okay, brilliant.
Make sense?
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. So we've come to the end of our questions today. So thanks for your time, David. If anybody watching this does have any further questions, please feel free to get in touch with myself, Erin Coffey, or one of the other Happiness Lab champions within the business. And if you're not sure who your champion is, if you speak to Erin, she'll be able to advise you of that. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you very much.